if you just look at the etymology of the word, right? What did immersion mean 100 years ago? It meant getting dunked in water. And psychologically, all of these experiences are very similar to that in the sense that they disorient our default way of going through the world. Right. So psychologists will talk about the fact that we have two different attention systems operating all the time, right? There's the one that allows you to walk and breathe and do all of the other things without having to think about, like left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And then there's the more cognitively intensive system that you apply to things that you actually need to figure out, right? So if you've ever seen someone walk into a door that they thought pushed and actually pulled, that's the moment when attention system 1 shuts off and attention system 2 turns on. And in the same way that when you jump into a pool, right, the moment after you dive in, that is the moment when attention system 1 turns off and attention system 2 goes, oh my God, what's going on? You're feeling cold water all over you. You're no longer stuck to the ground the way you usually are. And your brain starts paying attention in a way that we generally don't. Like, we have evolved in such a way that we can spend as little attention as possible on our surroundings, so we can focus the very limited processing power we have on things that are threats. So for me, the thing about immersion is that it's a very ephemeral experience and it's a very transitory experience. It is that act of going from one environment that you were immersed in, but you don't think of as being immersive, into a substantially different environment that you recognize as different. And so for that time period when you're sort of trapped between two worlds, that for me is the time when you are immersed. And interestingly, it's usually a twofer, right? So if you think of yourself walking into, say, the exhibition, there's that initial immersion when you are like, oh, I'm no longer in the museum. I don't know where I am. It's super cool. But then on the back end of that, there's also the transition back into the default world, right? So if you think of being in a film that you really enjoy, and that moment when you're suddenly standing on the pavement again, going like, what happened? Your heightened awareness of the real world is a second immersive experience that I think there's a lot of potential in there that I would love to explore later.
It's often inspired by the source of the phenomena, whether it's being with the tree, being a single drop of water, exploring the root structures of an Amazonian tree. Obviously, we haven't experienced falling into a black hole ever, so I don't know much about that one. That's very imaginary. But it's primarily trying to understand an emotional arc throughout the piece, what that's trying to convey, what I felt in the first instance of thinking, conceiving, experiencing this space, this phenomena. And then it turns into a process where, because often the audience is arriving from a busy street, very much like here, how do you actually, set the primers correct to bring the right intention of the work, or the right mindset prepared for the work to be conceived or perceived in a neutral state? And obviously it's not always possible for every work, but when it comes to each individual pieces that we've got here, they all conceived one way or another with a form of meditation, or even if it's an instruction from the docent, from the invigilators, it's told in a whispering voice in a darker room. So you don't have a space to sit down and fully immerse and have a meditative experience, but at least the way you interact with everyone, the moment you get through the doors of the installation, is tailored to enhance that moment. And obviously the filmic terms, every piece you've seen are individually designed in different times of, in different periods in our career and different years. Obviously the theme has been running somehow concurrently, but we've never put a feature length film together like this. And it was all short films curated, tailored with their own, how do we create an onboarding? How do we, create the ultimate environment to experience the piece, and then how we can create these offboarding. And obviously you don't need to probably design and dictate how the onboarding and offboarding should be for every piece of art you do, and people don't, and that's totally fine, but when it comes to some of the feelings, like standing in front of a giant sequoia tree is really moving your the sense of self-importance away from you when you are witnessing something so large, so, awesome. Obviously, how do you recreate that? And those are the primers, and trying to create that moment in the experience. And actually, if I can riff off of what you said about the, going back to 1990s, through this research, one interesting thing emerging, and we've been kind of monitoring this. Where do I feel this immersed? Where else it happens? Obviously, when we do breathing meditation, it helps. You're there in that moment. When you exercise, you are there in that moment. And then looking at the different architectural settings, like being a St. Paul's Cathedral, and probably most of the cathedrals designed to create that awe and that feeling of being united with something much larger than yourself. And if there's a choir inside, the way it reverberates, it obviously amplified. The entrance of a cathedral, the long corridor that you move forward and get a glimpse of the narrative, and you arrive at the big chamber, is an experience. But when you roll back even 2,000 years prior to Christianity, you look at the Orkney and the Stonehenge. These are the places that are designed to evoke certain sensations in combination with the sound. Drumming, if you play 60 BPM in Stonehenge, it creates this resonant frequency, actually alters your consciousness. I mean, breathing fast alters your consciousness anyway. So where I'm going with this is basically, us as species haven't changed much for the last 20,000 years, maybe 30,000 years, and our wired cognition immerse itself, finding different tools throughout the history. And rolling today, I'm not surprised that we are receptive to immersive media this much, because it's very innate. And whether we become numb to it, probably certain tools, we would become numb to it. But overall, the idea of immersion or embodiment is not any new, and it's as old as probably our species, and different ways that we've been exploring it. So basically trying to understand and entangle and kind of that dissect what influences you, and how can you optimize that feeling to evoke that sensation. What is it like to be that tree? What is it like to feel to be under the ground and feeling mycelium? How does it feel to dive into a human body following a single breath? And they all kind of require their own individual immersive sequences that starts with onboarding and offboarding.